1, 2, 3, 4. Hello, and welcome to another edition of Lay It on the Table, the Southern Board Game Podcast with the accent on Southern. I am one of your hosts, Joe Mahaffey, and for the third episode in a row, I have gotten that intro down perfectly. I think it's becoming rote for me, James. And of course, as always, my partner in crime.
I'm James Engelhardt. That's good to hear, Joe. I'm getting warmed up for the last couple of weeks here, get that intro down, cold.
It's going to happen.
Getting it hard.
It's really awesome. Going to happen for us. Well, as many of you know, over the last couple of episodes, we've been talking about Hasbro and the OGL. And today we're going to divert from that because there is another aspect of Hasbro in the sense that they are a toy company. And they do make other toys besides Wizards of the Coast-based products. And we are very fortunate today to have as our guest one of the founders and organizers of ToyLanta, the greatest toy show in the world, happening in Atlanta.
It is.
On March 25th through the 26th, I think. Let me just 24th for the 24th through the 26th.
It's 4th through the 26th.
Yeah, at the Hilton Atlanta Northeast. So friends, please welcome Mr. Buddy Finethy. Buddy, welcome to the show.
James, Joe, how are you guys doing?
We are doing pretty good, yeah. So I gotta be honest with the audience. So I am fortunate enough to know Buddy because Buddy is a lifelong friend of my wife, Dale. And Buddy knew Dale's parents as teachers growing up. And so it is through that connection that we have gotten to know Buddy through the years. And Buddy is an artist who is best known for creating the persona and the identity of the Mellow Mushroom Pizza franchise. So if you've ever walked into a Mellow Mushroom, you'll notice that each one is distinct. And for the majority of his career, Buddy was putting his imprint on that aesthetic. And so if you don't know him, you certainly know his work. And Buddy, we're just so glad to have you here.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Mellow Mushroom was a great way to turn an ill-spent youth into a career. It was a way of renovating wayward souls, apparently, because we had a lot of them.
Well, you know, I'm just.
But it was great, and
go ahead. I
was just going to say it was great. It gave me the option of doing other things too, though. I mean, we had a lot of stress and energy involved in starting the company back in the day. But once we were going and once we had hit that tipping point, I was more advice and guidance. You know, the last 10 years I was there. And so I had the opportunity to get involved with other projects. And one of those projects was being a consultant for Hasbro on special edition releases of G.I. Joe in the early 2000s.
Oh, that is very cool. I
didn't
know
that. Helped out with that. Yeah, it was fun. I was heavily involved in the G.I. Joe Collectors Club, and if anybody doesn't think they can get involved with things professionally by being a fan, they're wrong. And then for the next 3 years, I helped put out special editions with the Collectors Club and did a lot of special promotions projects with Hasbro and things like that, and just helped out wherever I could out of excitement, not knowing, you know, that most of the country doesn't get to participate in events like that. They don't get real fan-based events that celebrate their joy, like those national conventions, which are, on the whole, they're great shows, but they're expensive and they're far away from where people can go.
Sure.
So when I was in the middle of all that, but all my friends couldn't enjoy anything even totally like it because they wouldn't go that extra mile to those big conventions. And so we wanted to start something local that didn't travel, people could count on, that was economically feasible to get kids involved in collecting. You know, so it's not from the perspective of the vendor, it's from the perspective of the fan.
Oh, that's awesome.
Vendors, they're there, they're dealing artifacts, but what we're dealing in is the culture of toy collecting and the culture of people celebrating the things that give them joy, even if it's off kilter to the world. My entire life has been off kilter to the world. So I'm good with it. And just to show them the path that that if you don't celebrate fun in the things that you do, you will not invigorate that fun in other people.
Well, that's awesome. I'm sitting here staring at, I have two G.I. Joe's collectibles in my collection. I have the Dwight David Eisenhower and I have the General George Patton, and they're sitting, I'm staring at them across the room right now. So they were things I had given to my father, and when he passed away, they came back to me, and I'm just never been opened, still in the box. I did not realize that you were involved in the special collections there at one point. That might have been before your time, but
no, that was almost simultaneous. That was the classic collection releases, which were the general releases at the time. What I worked on was more the club exclusives and some of the boxes for the 30th anniversary collection that we put out back in the early 2000s. Our friend Daryl DePriest at Hasbro, who was head of Boys Toys, I'm sure you guys are familiar with Daryl. He retired last year, but Daryl was the greatest fan of G.I. Joe to ever touch that property. And he was amazing at Gateway, really super invigorated people into the team aspect of it, and people from the fan base, and bring them in. Don't make it it's not a secret, man. G.I. Joe belongs to Hasbro. You know? Yeah. And we had just come off of this real high. We had reinvigorated Bullet Man as a collectible. Bullet Man was the death knell of G.I. Joe in 1976. He was the worst designed superhero of all time, and he was a blatant ripoff of another one. You know, he was well known as the Black Mark, and we were like, well, this thing's a matter of perspective. What makes something popular? What makes something fun? And it's the fun that the fans bring to it. So we organized a load of fans and created a fake secret society, our own plastic Illuminati called the Defenders of Bullet Man. And we pulled off a scheme where we ended up on the New York Times front page with it.
Nice.
And our friends along in New York, Joe Club, those guys are relentless. And they were a powerhouse with it. But there was guys and gals from all over the country that just wanted to get involved with it out of the spirit of fun. And so, well, Bullet Man at that time was worth $5 on the market. G.I. Joe Bullet Man today, it's going to cost you bare minimum $300. All because the spirit of fun just came in like a tidal wave and took over the perception. And once we saw audience to respond to, I think Daryl was just sort of like, whoa, wait a minute. Let's see what we can do here. And, you know, to this day, I'm still in the Defenders of Bullet Man. It's become sort of a service organization equivalent to like the 501st or something like that in their fandom.
Right.
And we do a lot of good. We've, you know, reached out and done medical projects with people. We're working on a little thing now with a friend of ours who's in dire need. So it's all about art into the intellectual properties that you're devoted to. And not enough people take it that seriously, because without G.I. Joe, without that, my childhood was a wreck. But I had this thing to contrast and comparison to the culture of G.I. Joe and all the mythos around it and all the people that were involved with it. And more than anything else, it's been the people in the fandom that galvanized around the ideas. I'm great at cooking up ideas, but ideas without participation are nothing. And these guys participate. They really gun in and show their love, and they come to our shows. We've helped start 5 other shows around the country that we don't own. We help them through graphic design support, PR support. My layout people that, you know, I've been working with for 15 years have become kind of an industry standard for show layout and promotion. And I can't thank those two enough, because Ricky Zero and Bambi Lynn of the band Radio Cult are graphic designers. You know, there's so much more than that. They create mythology inside of things, which is a gift from the gods when you're dealing with intellectual property.
So just a quick note to our listeners, we got a little bit of digital garble. it was nothing major, buddy, but I will put a link to bulletman.org in our show notes so that the people can kind of get a sense of the organization that you were talking about. So
it's just fun, man. So just flat fun up on it.
So help me out a little bit, because I've been familiar with the concept of JoeLanta for a long time, and I'm not really sure. It's a chicken and the egg question. Which came first, JoeLanta or ToyLanta? And tell us how all that kind of evolved.
JoeLanta started in 2000, and it was just going to be kind of a local thing. And we didn't realize we were going over and above what other people had done with shows. But when people came in that first time, we started doubling every year. So we would double. And then finally got to a point where, we had to really take it seriously. We started as JoeLanta, and all through the early 2000s, we were JoeLanta. And then somewhere in the early 2010s, we realized it was so much broader, and so many people were listening to so many things. It was almost a college identity wish fulfillment. Mutated us from ToyLanta to JoeLanta. But then once we were rebranded as ToyLanta, there was a huge contingent that wanted their JoeLanta back.
Mm-hmm.
And so we slimmed that concept down to just the basics of what it is. And so that's for the truly fervent on that one brand. But ToyLanta coming up in March 24th to the 27th. And really, to say those 3 days is limiting what it is. We've got people coming from Canada, England, Scotland, Germany. We've got people coming from Mexico City. We've got people coming from Colombia, South America. Brazil is a huge G.I. Joe country. Falcone down there was amazing. One of the G.I. Joe offshoot renames. It was basically adventure team stuff for the most part. But they really... Mexico machismo mixed in with toy fair is interesting dynamic, and the devotion they have to it down there for a brand of Joe we never even heard of here is incredible. Some of my best pals that we run into at the shows are our Mexican contingent. Those guys, they do without a lot of what we have access to, so they become incredibly resourceful at creating what they need, at being the Uber customizers. And that is really where we took our cue for ToyLanta and JoeLanta to emphasize creativity in our IP interactions, to emphasize the input of the end user as a viable source of beta testing. Look at video games, man. I mean, they throw them out there and they're half finished. But in this case, every wish that they were giving us, it's like a gestalt act of will when you get surveys and stuff from the conventions, and they tell you exactly what you need to do. It's not brain surgery. It's just letting ego out of the way when you're planning something like this. You have to do it for the good of the recipient and to give them true entertainment. I've been in the entertainment business, more than art, more than PR, more than commercial art. I've been in the entertainment business for 35 years. And when you have the public doing the molding of the concept and pushing the energy in it, you really have it made, because it is a will of organic evolution.
Well, I've noticed too, in looking at the agenda and the schedule, cosplay is a big part of that. Now, is that purely, I guess it's not just a G.I. Joe show because it says Star Wars cosplay. Do you get a lot of variety in that part of the medium as well?
We get a lot of, yeah, absolutely. We are featuring an area for Star Wars collectors this time called the X-Wing.
Okay. I saw that.
And they have their own total wing, and they have their own cantina set up inside the hotel. They're going to have, what they want, because the respect I have for the 501st as a charitable organization can't even be summed up. I've seen those guys just kill themselves in those uniforms for 10, 12, 15 hours doing things for charity. And it really is, you think, well, they just like dressing up. No, their heart's in it.
Yeah.
And I feel the same way about most toy collectors. We have an inner need to connect with a childlike sense of wonder. And anything we can do to keep that childlike sense of wonder cooking is the best thing we could do.
Well, it's funny you say that
because this world will kill you.
Yeah, it's funny you say that because we talk a lot on this program about, you know, the 3 years of the pandemic in terms of what it's done, not only to our social worlds, but just the craving that we have for the social interaction. And I think having a touchstone to what you're talking about, that childlike sensibility, you know, whether it's a board game, whether it's a tabletop game, whether it's a toy you identify with, Lord knows I'd love to have all my Kenner Star Wars stuff back.
Oh, brother, I know where you can get it, pal. In about a month. Have you ever been a completist yourself in collecting?
I am a completist in my own way. If you saw the current state of my board game collection, you would see that is a problem for sure.
I'll tell you what, a piece of art and there an activity, you know, and I look at board games like Jumanji is one of the best designed visually board games of all time, just because of the richness of the artwork of it. Or you have the classics like Rock'em Sock'em Robots or Battleship or something like that, where the art kind of set your expectations of the whole thing. And White Wolf and Dungeons and Dragons with their art as the centerpiece, and really, I mean, it's not for the art, what would have differentiated it? Not much. But they were perfectly willing to be the sons of Frank Frazetta over there.
Well, you know,
and I dig it.
It's funny you said that. I just got through reading the book Slaying the Dragon by Ben Riggs, and he spends a lot of time in the book talking about the artists and how the artists and their creative vision had an impact on the game and the rest of the designers, and how when Peter Atkinson took over the company, when Wizards of the Coast bought him, he went in, opened up the vault, and basically told all the artists, whatever you did is yours. And they probably had,
that's great.
They probably had like $3 million worth of paintings in storage that were not even considered as assets in the sale between TSR and Wizards of the Coast. And Peter just let it walk out. It's an amazing part of the story. I'm going to talk about that later in the show.
Well,
but
yeah.
It was just appropriate.
That's a lot like what Marvel did back in the 70s with original artwork, the covers and interior artwork. Before that point, you know, we call it the Jack Kirby rule in my world. Before that point, artwork back. You never saw it again. You got paid your money, you better just live with that. But then when artists start getting their artwork back, it opens up a whole new industry. It opens up the ability to not just sell those originals, but to sell the originals as a print from the printed into use artwork. And the ability to survive as fantasy artists. The first to be able to do that, other than religion, in the history of the world. You know, just an amazing freedom and recognition of artists inside of the commercial world. Prior to that, you never heard who painted what. Well, you know, nowadays they have cults of personality, and I love it.
Well, you know, it's funny you say that because obviously in our world of board games, one of the biggest things that, in fact, it was the game Wingspan that helped James and I reconnect. And one of the artists.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, one of the artists involved in that game is Natalie Roja. And Natalie did a lot of the birds that you see on the cards, and she also sells the prints. And so she's made a little cottage industry of that. In fact, we bought a print for Dale's parents after we spent some time out in Colorado because we kept seeing these birds over and over again. And one of the few Patreons that I support is Devin Rue, the mistress of maps. And she's a cartographer that does these amazing D&D maps that you've probably seen if you've ever seen Critical Role or some of the Beetle and Grimm stuff.
Oh, yeah. I'm a sucker for the ephemera. Anything like Alan Lee or somebody at that level would lay out for world building, because the very heart of world building is the map.
100%.
And then you move on to the personalities and the adversities and the challenge and the hero's journey, you know, and it really is, you know, all of it is an extension of Joseph Campbell and the heroic nature of our story structure in Western culture and a lot of Eastern. And that's the only way you can believe those worlds. You got to be able to smell them. You got to be able to see them. You know, and some artists are good enough to say process. They can marry a soul to a project at one particular time just with visual overlay. And
so I'm glad we're
a new game. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was going to say, since we're talking about art, I was curious about how that started for you and how you developed the sort of visual style that you're seems like you're still sort of exploring, and particularly with the way that you devised that for Mellow Mushroom.
World building. It was exactly like creating.
There we go. Yes.
We created the physics of that universe. We call it the Bob Clampett universe because Bob Clampett could ignore physics like nobody on Earth. And our characters, I based the characters on Bob Hope and Bing Crosby and the original founders of Mellow Mushroom.
Wow. Sort
of mixing the road movies with Bob and Bing in with a psychedelic travelogue. So we were never out of ideas because there was always somewhere unexplored in that universe. There was always some place that we could take them in an adventure to be had. And we were doing comic strips with, multiversal theming, 20, 30 years ago, and doing things like time travel and exploration of what things mean to people, but on a subliminal level. Our goal was to tell stories, but not to ever tell them obviously.
Okay.
If you can impart that sense of mystery inside of a piece of artwork, if you give the imagination room to grow inside of that artwork, it will fill it up better than you can yourself. That's why you've got to have a bunch of people working on stuff. You can't be a singular vision and really get across a three-dimensional world. You got to be able to bounce that perspective off of different perspectives just to see how it's going to look in other perspectives, if it makes sense, if it's even as exciting to other people as it is to you. And it proves out every time. And, my goal was to help create my co-creators over the years. And so I did. I've worked with incredible artists, so much better than myself, who didn't know they were better than me. And I'll never tell them, don't blow my cover, bro. But that is world building. I think, our entire language and thought process is based on linear information presentation and interconnecting that information. And people who invest so much more energy into these properties and into these games and into these worlds, you'll sit and talk. I know you and Dale and the girls probably have sheer fights over what somebody can do in the event of a game turmoil. But it does give you that sense of realism. It gives you that three-dimensional holographic space in your head that is just as real as the real world. When you're completely indulged in that, where is your real world? What is the real world? To me, anything that gets your brain into a separate space from the world that we're in every day is a gift from God. Because we have a narrative and we have a linear flow of time, and people don't realize how much, the wear and tear of negativity in everyday life is breaking apart their outlook on the world. And, I can't save people from drowning in the middle of the ocean. I can't fly a helicopter, but I can sure give somebody a breathing space on reality. Mm-hmm. That's what we all need. We need a moment of separation from our ego and our anxiety and be able to reset. Sometimes it's just a breath between saying the right thing and the wrong thing. Yep. You get reset in your life, you're taking that breath, brother. You're filling up with a moment of perspective. And if I wish, the main thing that I ever wanted to do in my life was be able to undo all the things that I should have taken a few seconds to think about saying before I said. And
that's fair.
And this is definitely one of those exercises that helps build up that ability to take a second, be calm, don't react, because I've been through stressful situations on this world and many others, and mellow. Yeah. But everybody's been through stressful situations, and they all need the same release. And that's what games are. That's what toys are. That's what comics are. And they may be no less stressful in their way, but it's a separate stress. It's a stress you're not married to. You can think about that and then forget about yours for just the briefest second.
Yep.
Just let go of it.
The whole,
indulge.
Yep. So you can have that, you can experience those emotions in a guarded, sort of framed off way so that you can rejoin your life and have that little bit of clarity and a little bit more freedom to breathe. And and still experience all the things.
Yeah, and that's the importance that people skip when they gloss over how important these geek culture things are to people.
Mm-hmm.
They have no idea how many homicides it's probably presented to have Dungeons and Dragon boards in half the country houses, you know.
Oh yeah.
Well, there's been a lot of stories about that. There's been a lot of stories about that, about how people made different decisions because there was a group or there was a community that they felt connected to.
Yep.
And the tabletop role play world is part of that. You know, it's interesting. James and I talk a lot about our different perspectives on this thing, because I grew up in a household where my parents were like, D&D, yeah, sure, whatever. Whereas James literally had to go underground to play.
Oh yeah. Yep.
You know.
Yeah.
So Satanic Panic was all about my family.
Man.
Yeah.
What was your favorite game art when you were kids, the two of you? What was the one game that visually just kicked you?
Man, there's a couple of them, though. I mean, so I grew up by reading a lot of comics too. So seeing Champions was fun because you could, like, part of the character sheet at the end of the book, you copy it, and it had like a figure in a dynamic pose, and you could go and you could draw your costume on top of the figure. So that was super cool. Yeah. And I liked the post-apocalyptic feel of Gamma World.
That was some good design work.
Yeah, so I really liked
Fallout,
those.
I think, drew some inspiration.
Okay.
Yeah, and I don't know if I can answer the question the way you've posed it. I mean, obviously, I was influenced and pulled by what I saw on the D&D cover, particularly the second edition cover, which I think is the first one I got, if I recall. Just thinking about it, the first edition of 2E, the Advanced Dungeons and Dragons original one is the one I got before Lorraine Williams came in, which I think was officially the second edition. But I just remember being inspired by a lot of album covers and being inspired.
Oh yeah. Now, what are your favorite album covers?
Oh man, I think a lot of the early Pink Floyd albums, like Atom Heart Mother, Dark Side of the Moon was always one that kind of got. But the things that were really interesting to me, it's kind of like I still to this day will take a copy of Sgt. Pepper's and study the cover and try to figure out who everybody is and see if I can still remember who all those folks are.
Boy, you talk about a fish out of water. We're out of time on that. We just don't even know who half those people are. Thank God.
I know,
there's
right?
YouTube. They can just fill us in, man.
Oh, exactly. Well, one of my I was going to just say the other thing, but when I really discovered art, though, was when I started falling in love in comic art, like Berkeley Breathitt. I started following him when Bloom County first came out. And it's through him that I discovered Maxwell Parrish. I saw you had posted something recently about Maxwell Parrish, and it was because of that Bloom County cover with Opus in the Maxwell Parrish environment that I really discovered that artist, because I would not have discovered him otherwise, I don't believe. At least not until later.
Oh my God. Have you ever seen a real Maxwell Parrish in person?
Not in person. I've seen it in books, but not in person.
Oh yeah.
And then
in person, Maxwell Parrish was like glass. It was like glass on a canvas.
Yep.
This guy was incredible. It was like something you've never seen. I got into the most trouble in a museum I ever got into because I couldn't stop myself from touching the damn thing. And it was like out of every.
They don't like that, man.
They don't like. Minneapolis is not a forgiving town in the arts establishment, sir. Those guys were not listening to my, hey, I didn't know I was touching it. They figured I was going to lose some fingers.
Oh, yeah. Well, I was a docent at an art museum for a while, so yeah.
How was that? How do people strike you when you see them like that in that once in a while? They don't go every day. There's some people that go every day, but
yeah.
What's the difference between before you started working there and after, and how you saw people's perception of a museum?
That was a fun time. We did a lot of, this was at the University of Nebraska's art museum. So it's mostly early 20th century and then through like the modern and modernist. So up through, all 20th century, late 20th century as well. And watching people, because I would lead tours and getting people to sort of move to be able to wrap their head around a more abstract, more sort of contemporary art. That was super fun, because otherwise they'd walk in and the kids would giggle at things that didn't make a lot of sense to them. And then we'd start talking about it and asking them to, what part of this draws your attention? Well, that draws my attention. Why? And just keeping asking that why question, and how does it make you feel, and why are you drawn there? And then watching them sort of really start to dial into, there is stuff here to look at. There is stuff to, think about and engage. And that was the best.
And really, my thing with the artwork I did, I wanted to be accessible to the public, far more accessible than somebody having to read planogram to understand what it's about. But what we discovered is we could do both. We could give that deep depth story that somebody who may see it for 5 years won't get it, and then one day they get it and they can never unsee it.
Right.
That was the epiphanal moment I was going for, and I think much the same with a lot of the artists that are in a museum. You're trying to convey usually a very complex message, and people don't have context for absorbing the complexity of the message.
Right.
The average human being. There's people that take the deep dive. You take the deep dive. Joe takes the deep dive. I take the deep dive. But most people just want to skim the surface. And so what we did is we developed 3 levels of layering. We would do an obvious level where there were obvious things to get, obvious things were happening. Then there was a subliminal level where we would hide stories in all the artwork, or there was an overarching thing that was a joke to us, and it would take a very special mind to get. But then there was the thematic level, which we would always work on the level of what's good for humanity. What's a positive story you can tell somebody that's not cliche and trite, and that can be hidden very well underneath these other 2 layers. So I know if we put that much effort into what we were doing, some of these cats were going 10 levels deep.
Right.
And I always wonder if those epiphanal moments were obvious to people that worked in those museums.
Well,
did you see moments where people got it?
Yeah, and you'd spend a lot of time, and it was fantastic to spend so much time, just be able to sit there for a really long time, or go to see even when the painting was off or the piece of art was off the walls and was down in storage, you could still go and visit it and just spend a lot of time. And, sometimes you don't know exactly like where the pieces, where it came from, what it's in quotes supposed to be saying, but you experience it, over time, and you develop a relationship with the piece. And maybe that's different from what the artist wanted or what the artist's idea is, but it's still a living meaning, right? And there's a lot to be said for, the viewer is going to be the one who also sort of co-creates the meaning in the moment with that piece of work. And maybe their interpretation is stronger, maybe not, but it's an interesting process to go through to build that kind of relationship with a piece of art. And mostly for me, a lot of it is writing. I'm a poet, so I write and read a lot of poetry. And you can sometimes say, I bet this poem started with like this phrase or this image. And sometimes you don't know. And it's a fantastic process to dive, like you were saying, take that deep dive and continue to develop that relationship with a piece of work.
Well, I'm sort of the Charles Bukowski of art. So there you go. You got that same rambling through and causing a mess and then figuring out how to clean it up elegantly.
Well, what I'll say after listening to this, buddy, is there is a board game called Canvas that if you haven't heard of, you should check it out. Canvas is great because what you just described, the multiple layers. To play this game, you are creating a canvas of multiple layers, and it's very innovative the way that they used clear acetate sheets to stack so that you're basically creating what you think your design is. And
wow, that sounds like a great game, man.
Yeah, it's a trilogy. It's a trilogy. The third one has just gone through Kickstarter, and that'll be it. So but it's really interesting the way that they've constructed the game. I'll put a link to it in the show notes under this segment so you can check it out.
All right. Well, you guys, if you get to come down for ToyLanta, I don't know if you'll get to, but we will have a gaming area.
That's cool.
Joe Mahaffey Game Arena. And
I'm actually in Washington that weekend. I'm actually in Washington that weekend for the Call on Congress. No, wait, no. I'm sorry. No. That is going to be earlier in March. That weekend, I'm actually doing the colon cancer race here in Charlotte for my brother. So
far more important and a great organization.
But I would love to be down there at some point in the future for that, for sure. But before we end this discussion, I got to say, you do have a new venture. It's a new restaurant concept. I'd love for you to plug it here, please.
Oh, we don't anymore. Oh. We have officially retired from the restaurant industry.
Oh, okay. Did not know that. News to me.
Last month, just realized all I was doing was chasing ego at this point. and shut her down so I could go back to artwork. I mean, I've always done the artwork while I was doing the other restaurant, but the artwork is outnumbering, and people, I seem to be on a comeback trail is all I know. I never knew I went away, but here I am.
Well, I'll just say you heard it here first, because I didn't know it. So that's thanks for letting us know. That's awesome that you're back on your art
Absolutely.
path.
Well, a person's got to go with their destiny, and
Sure.
it was never my destiny. It was the destiny other people thought for me, you know.
Right.
But I do enjoy creating those environments, so I don't have to own the thing to create those environments. So that's what I'm emphasizing now, is sort of the design work in restaurants, or the book work that I'm doing, or doing a lot of identity graphics for people, because all this AI graphic business is robbing design and art design from the soul of somebody interpreting somebody else.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, because I was going
AI paste ups.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because I was going to ask you about your thoughts on the impact of AI art, because I hear a lot discussed about it, but as you were talking, I was thinking about that earlier, but we moved on. So since you came back to that, do you have any perspectives on that?
I do. It is, as a person who has had their art ripped off by AI, and it is obvious. You put the work that I was speaking of out and compare it to the pieces that they drew on, you can see the complete trace job of AI.
Mm-hmm.
So that, I love it for common people who want to express creativity. But you're always going to have those cats trying to game the system to just pass something off. I'm not a big believer in plagiarism or just complete unadulterated stuff. I've been the subject of it multiple times in my career. And so it's very personal to me, but most people are never even going to hear about legal maneuvering like that.
Mm.
Yeah.
They don't realize that defense is the heart of copyright. And if you are not actively defending your artwork, you could lose it, as Robert Crumb did Keep on Trucking in 1971.
Wow. I remember that graphic.
You can have your artwork legally taken away from you, used by anybody to make money on it. Crumb never got a dime off of Keep on Trucking.
Or never claim it in the world of Bill Watterson and the Peeing Calvin.
Right.
Exactly, man. Look, Bill Watterson and you were talking about Bloom County. Bloom County was revolutionary in comic strips. I just got
100%.
the big Bloom County coffee table book. Have you seen that thing?
I have seen it.
No.
Yeah.
It is 1-to-1 scale for his artwork that he drew. So
Wow.
it's cat size, has all the imperfections in it, and this thing is a monster. It takes up my entire coffee table.
Wow.
Wow.
It's a beautiful book, man. Anybody, really honestly, if any of your listeners are people that have been into IPs and never really done a deep dive into the graphic creation of it, I say it adds a different dimension to the experience of the games when you have a little knowledge. I encourage anybody to look up the artists that are involved with it, because you're not just getting their artwork, you're getting their intelligence, you're getting their soul, you're getting their flavor, you're getting their perspective of the moment. And really, all we all are curators of our own collection in our mind.
Well, it's funny that you bring that up, because
the art of curation.
Yeah, it's funny that you bring that up, because one of the things I love about the board game industry that we follow is that 9 times out of 10 they will have the game designer and the artist listed on the title of the box.
You know how amazing that is compared to my early career? Nobody got to sign nothing when I first came on board. And now it's like a world where you can create your name inside of somebody else's name and jump off of it.
Yeah, yeah.
Just an amazing evolution. The AI thing, now, like, somebody's going to come in and start doing a daily comic strip with an AI, ripping off Calvin and Hobbes.
Yeah.
And all it'll be is a bunch of retapes of everything he's done. And they'll change that 20%, and it'll slide by, and somebody will make money off of it. I think that people really need to question the morality of stealing other people's artwork. You know, the product of their flesh interacting with media, and take it away from an AI who doesn't care whether you take it away from them.
Right.
It's the people you got to train, not the AI. And most people don't even think about it. They don't think that cutting and pasting somebody else's work is wrong. And if you're not making money off of it, it's not wrong. That's peer-to-peer, and that's under special licensing for Creative Commons. You know, you can, if you're creating something and giving it away, or you're creating a low number of something, not doing much with it, nobody's going to say a thing about it. It's when somebody busts out, and I can tell you the magic number is $100,000. You go past $100,000, there's lawyers coming out of everywhere.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
But in the case of the AI, who do you sue?
Right.
That's fair.
I don't know, man. Yeah. So what do you guys think about the AI question?
Well, for me, it's been kind of interesting because I've been looking at it from different points of view. Not so much on the art side. I've only looked at one of those, and I did that Instagram filter thing that was out, I don't know, back before Christmas, and that was interesting, but it was like, eh. I've been looking at it more from the standpoint of how it can be used in a constructive way. So, for example, I went into ChatGPT and asked it to explain the rules to Root to me, which is a board game, and it came back with a very simple way to explain the game and what you had to do. I thought that was pretty interesting. I typically will use it personally as writing prompts, which I think is helpful when I'm trying to look at a blank piece of paper and I have to do something. But I'm not trying to take anybody's IP or anything with it. I think I agree with you wholeheartedly that we don't want to do that. James,
that's the conundrum, right?
James is in a world of academia where one of his colleagues actually, I believe, exposed a student who used it purely to write a paper and got caught.
Yes. And that got the kid busted. And that was the first, I mean, that was 2 weeks after ChatGPT hit that this kid was using it to write a paper, not a good paper. And there are a little, bunch of red flags that popped up. And so that was an interesting story. But so I think about it a lot in terms of that. Yeah.
So I think we're in the early stages
more
of
than
it.
Technology is coming.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think it's early stages. I think we're going to see, unfortunately, we're going to see a lot of good up and coming copywriters not get an opportunity to get a job because of ChatGPT. And I think in your world, to your point, there'll probably be some original concept artists that won't get a shot. And it's going to be people developing their skills above and beyond that can eliminate the IP flagrancy on it from a violation standpoint is going to come into play. We're going to find people are going to need editors and fact checkers and people that can weed that kind of stuff out. But I think it's really early stages, and it's pretty scary though because there are some good people that are going to lose jobs just because this is available.
Well, there's game artists that are going to lose jobs, and there's game designers and game writers that are definitely going to lose a job unless people take a stand to support human-built art, a humanist approach to creativity. Because why do you want to see a computer's perspective on the world? You're not really. All you're seeing is a computer cutting and pasting other people's perspectives of the world. And it wouldn't have any context or it wouldn't have real true applicability in a true creative sense to most people's lives because they don't get that chance at really tailoring this thing from someone else's perspective when they're just bouncing it off a computer. And I hate to see those creatives out of work. I mean, I was lucky. I lived in the last generation, that was truly raised on the heyday of Marvel Comics. Where the greatest artists on the planet were working.
Right.
And, it's not the same now because now Marvel is this mega corporation. You don't draw in that same kind of bullpen bulletin mentality. I think Stan Lee's bullpen bulletins were one of the greatest galvanizing social media outlets of the 70s.
No, that's fair.
Yeah, that was a great
world inside of that.
Yep.
Oh man, I wanted to work in that joint. Are you kidding?
Oh hell yeah, yeah.
That was where I wanted to be. With jumping John Buscema, I'll be there. Stan was the greatest hyperbole guy ever.
Oh yeah. Nope, he was a salesman and a showman.
You were about to say you hung out with?
Oh, there are a group of artists, comics guys in Hillsborough, North Carolina for a while, years ago, I want to say early mid 90s. And that was, they had there was like 4 or 5 of them there. And it was great to go up. They had a little borough of offices, little network there at the top of, I don't know, some little building in downtown. And I go up there and hang out and it was also brutal just to watch, you have to do, 20 something pages of art in basically 20 something days. And this was before, they were doing this digitally. So it was all like once a week, the FedEx guy would show up and they put all their pages in these giant FedEx envelopes and zoom them out to me. And it was,
man, I don't miss those days at all.
yeah, right. No, it was astonishing. They were having a great time, but it was also a pain in the ass. And it was an amazing thing to see just sort of get a look at what the bullpen, might have looked like, and hear other stories too. But like, oh wow, it's super fun, but man, it's a ton of work.
Yeah, I got to hang out a lot with Adam Hughes back in the early 2000s. We were pretty good friends. Neither one of us had quite taken off right. It was basically the moment all of it was taken off. And then became friends with Tony Harris and Tom Fisher at Jolly Roger Studios. They were handling Starman at that time for DC. Adam was doing all the Wonder Woman covers. Oh, wow. George Genti, who's still doing Buffy and Firefly, was in the same studio. I mean, Atlanta in the mid-'90s reached some kind of crescendo on talent just coming to town. And it made you better just to be around these people. And the pressure cooker that comics artists and writers worked under. My friend Dan Jolly was writing Starman at the time, and it was the hottest book. I mean, it was the hottest book DC had going. Pre-sales were really good, and everybody was really going crazy over a lot of the artwork in the book. And it's really interesting the kind of pressure cooker it puts people around those artists under. Oh yeah, because they're getting better by the minute. Better as you're going. You don't get better at gaming. You don't get better at writing. You don't get better at poetry. You don't get better at artwork. It's evolve or die.
Yes.
Yeah.
And man, they got those. It's 144 separate graphics in a comic book every month.
Wow.
And that was being hand drawn up until just a few years ago.
Yeah.
And that people say, well, computers cheat in that regard. No. Almost every comic book artist I know shoots their own reference. Draws every bit of it. There are people that will, draw inspiration a little too heavily from other people's layouts and stuff like that. So for the most part, DC, Marvel, Image, any of those guys were so hyper aware of legalities. And, one good lawsuit can put any small studio out of business. Mm-hmm. And, to see the stress and then somebody's going to come along and rip that off. You know, somebody, if I say do a painting in Adam Hughes style, there ain't going to be no doubt in that AI who Adam Hughes is and what style we're talking about and who they're ripping.
That's fair.
I think that there is a philosophy that we need to reach, appreciating creatives. And I don't say this for me. My day is done, brother. It's the future of creatives. I got to enjoy success in art in the last time in our humanity where it was uncomputer assisted. And so I made my bones and I got my deal and I got out. But these kids that really want that moment again, they face a much bigger climb than we do. Because now, how do you fight a computer? How do you do anything better than a computer? You don't. Right. All you can do is find your perspective and take value in your perspective. And not enough people get that burned into them.
No, and that's
the one thing about having an adversity-ridden childhood is, brother, you know how to fight a scrap. And a lot of these kids, they're not scrappers. They don't fight. They don't want to push their thing on people. It's not ego to recognize your own value.
Right.
Now those are great words of wisdom. I appreciate that perspective, and it's given us something to think about.
Hard one.
Well, just out of curiosity, because you were talking about some of the people that you used to interface with, and I would be remiss if I didn't bring this up. I would love to hear the story of how Buddy Finethy ended up doing T-shirts for the first season of Stranger Things.
Oh my God, that came out of the blue. I mean, literally, my screen printer. I had this young lady that I used to screen printing, and she took to it like nobody's business, and that was her way of getting me back. That was her. She hooked me up with the gig, and believe me, I didn't know anything about Stranger Things until it was on screen. Those NDAs, man, they don't talk. Nobody talks. Right. And then there they were, and I still have the rights to the artwork, so I may just print up a run of those shirts at some point and and run them around. We'll see what happens with Stranger Things next. I think they were at a finishing point, weren't they?
Yeah, they're kind of coming to the conclusion, but it was just one of those things because it's one of those threads because we started talking about Hasbro D&D. They have the Stranger Things edition. We're interviewing you. We're talking about ToyLanta, and now we're back to Stranger Things in this whole thing. Anyway,
and
that's just me bringing the whole thread together.
There it is.
I wish I'd gotten a shot at that Hellfire Club shirt they did the next season over. I mean, it was like,
oh man,
I was like, I would have gone full John Byrne X-Men Hellfire Club on.
Yeah. That would have been awesome.
But it was a fun gig.
That's it. I'm going to the AI and asking for a Hellfire shirt in the style of Buddy Finethy and see what the AI does.
That chat will say who? What? Who? Believe me,
come back full of mushrooms
when you don't have enough. Yeah, it will. It's been known to happen, brother.
Oh man!
But it interfacing with entertainment entities like movie, television folks, because I've done movie posters and a lot of television prep art and stuff like that. 95% of what gets produced doesn't get used.
Right.
I mean, there were dozens of T-shirt designs for that, and I did there was a movie Vince McMahon and the WWE were doing about a decade ago, or they were trying to get made. And I did all the prep art for that. And so it's like doing an entire marketing campaign for a project that never happened. And you have that happen to you over and over and over again because they would rather try again than put the less thing out they could. And I understand that. But, brother, man, when you're about 25 hours straight into a gig, you're sort of questioning your choices in life.
Well, no, I get it. It's funny because I doubt you remember this, but when you open up the Ballantine Mellow Mushroom and you had us out as friends and family night, we brought Chris and Roberta with us. Chris is a musician friend of ours who plays in our D&D group, and he sold one of his original songs for a movie soundtrack, and the movie never got made. But he sold the rights to the song. He made some cash on it. I don't know how much, but that's it.
Yep.
And it never got made.
I got smart. I got smart to multiple levels of art rights, and that's as true in music as it is in art.
Yeah.
Visual art. And, people just need to educate themselves on what they sell or what they don't have to sell. You can just rent out the first printing rights. You can rent out the second printing rights. You can rent out the third printing rights. And just knowing the legalities. But most artists want to shy away from taking responsibility for the business end of things.
Right.
Yeah.
They want to be successful, but they want somebody else to handle the business. It don't happen. That's a fantasy. That's a commercial artist. Leonardo was a commercial artist. Michelangelo was a commercial artist. These guys had one patron. It was the Pope, brother. And Brother Man was a tough customer. So, commercial art, the mindset that I understand. My dalliances into fine art are just straying from because that's what I know. I know how that world operates. I know those rights. But fine artist is so ambiguous. It's so gray. It's so when do you know you've done something? When do you know you're successful? How do you find some regularity in your life? I have a hard time understanding it because I was raised in the Marvel Comics world.
Yeah, as a poet, I can say I have some ideas.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, brother, I tell you what, the best poetry interface I ever had was Grateful Dead comics. I was doing some work with I did Relics magazine back in the 80s, was an illustrator for them. That's kind of where I got my commercial bone.
Oh, wow.
Okay.
And we were working on the comics over there. So I was a guy named Timothy Truman. I don't know if you know Timothy Truman, but he did a book called Scout years ago, and he's a really stylistically Southwestern artist, and it's hard to compete with a Timothy Truman, man.
Wow.
And and that was another one of those gigs where you're producing 4 or 5 pieces in the hopes of getting one of them printed. Because you're in a competition with straight up other, creators. And I imagine it's the same in the gaming industry because there's independent developers that are trying to get things done. And you always wonder, would that have worked if they'd banded together more?
Right.
If they'd worked together more? Or was that even possible? Because there's some people you just can't work with.
Well, and I think too, there's this whole idea of an anatomy of a Kickstarter. How mature does your product need to be before you can take it to a Kickstarter or a game found, and how much play testing needs to be done? Because 9 times out of 10, when you see these Kickstarters come to the floor, they seem to be baked with art. They seem to be baked with concepts, and it's just a matter of how we're going to get it from that to prototype to production.
I don't know, man.
Yeah,
I've got an RPG called Old Gods of Appalachia. It's based on a podcast. Wow. Yeah, and the art's fantastic for it. But I thought, okay, great. It's a tabletop RPG. Everything's going to be in place, right? This thing should deliver quickly. Even the PDF that I had signed up for. Nope, they're still doing more play testing and more development, and yeah, that was kind of a surprise.
That's
but
why
it's a great look.
The most effective developers are in benign dictatorships.
Yes.
If the buck stops at one spot, one guy can say yes.
Yeah.
And I worked for those one guys, and I aspired to be that one guy. And nowadays, I just do projects that make me happy. That's all. That's the only thing that is a factor in it.
And it's clear that ToyLanta is one of those projects. So just a reminder for everybody, if you're in Atlanta, the weekend of March 24th through the 26th, it is going to be at the Atlanta Northeast Hilton. And
Tree City, baby.
And the show starts Friday at 6 o'clock till 10:30 p.m., Saturday 10 to 6, and Sunday. I always wanted to do this. 11 to 4.
Absolutely. We're going to have gaming. We'll have comics. We'll have toys. We'll have more stormtroopers than you can shake a stick at.
Love it.
We'll have artists, and the maker guys will be there. My group of maker guys, we educate the public on vacuum forming, foam carving.
Oh, that's awesome.
Technique. But our whole thrust with the maker guys, Steve Bugg and Clay Thayer are the maker guys, and I just get to be the great cheerleader. But the whole point of the maker guys is to educate people in making fast way using cheap materials.
Love it.
There you go.
Nobody's got the money they used to have, brother. We just want people to be able to create, even if they got cardboard and Elmer glue.
Love that.
So
there you go.
It's the important thing. So come on down to ToyLanta. ToyLanta is next month. ToyLanta is in September.
Okay.
With ToyLanta, we'll also have GooCon, which is a convention of special effects makeup artists, makeup professionals. A lot of my movie guys, a lot of my great friends in the movie industry, they're Invisible Academy Award winners is what they are.
Right.
They're people that have done amazing things, and they're going to be there. Our friend Nelson Burke is running GooCon with us, and that'll happen in September alongside ToyLanta. In March, we'll have the main dealer's room. We'll have the X-Wing. We'll have the 501st. We'll have the Four Horsemen will be dropping an exclusive. They'll be dropping their next drop at our show. And the Four Horsemen, if you're not familiar with them, they're four of the greatest designers in the toy industry history. And these guys have chosen ToyLanta as one of their hills to defend, and we dig them for it because they're beautiful cats. They do amazingly beautiful work. Thank you guys so much for having me on.
No, thanks, buddy. We appreciate you. We'll talk to you soon, and we'd love to have you back sometime.
Oh, anytime.
Good to meet you, buddy.
Good to meet you, sir. Good luck with poetry.
Thanks, man.
All right, pal.
Take care.
Talk to y'all later.
All right.
All right, bye.
So that was Buddy Finethy, one of the creators and founders of ToyLanta and ToyLanta. We were glad to have him on today. So James, we can go ahead and move on. I know we've got a little bit. We're about at an hour.
I know.
Do you want to run through this, or you want to save some of this for next time?
Let's see. No, we might as well save this for next time.
Okay.
Because an hour in that he was a live wire.
Yeah, it was great. It was good stuff. And I think when you can get a creative like that on and just have him kind of give you a sense of perspective. I know it wasn't all about gaming, but it was really all, it all rhymes. And I love that.
Yeah.
So
there was a bunch of geek culture and a lot of really interesting insights into the art part of that. So.
And I think my favorite part of that, one of my favorite parts of that interview was, he was talking about a side of Hasbro that we haven't heard talked about.
It's true.
The people who work inside the organization that are passionate about the game. I think we've seen allusions to that in the OGL discussion, but to just kind of get this from some of the other properties, I think it's easy to forget to look at something in a one-dimensional way. And I think being able to see this from multi-dimensions is great. And all that. So we'll save some of this for next time, because when you get somebody that's got that kind of experience on, it's good to just let's let that be the episode. So With that said, Lay It on the Table, of course, is a bi-weekly podcast. And so I would appreciate it if you could go to layitonthetable.show and maybe follow us there. And if you'd like, if you're so inclined, please feel free to go to Apple Podcasts and leave us a 5-star and maybe a review if you're up to it. And of course, you can find our YouTube channel, Geek and Southern, on YouTube, where you'll see obviously a copy of this particular podcast, but you'll also see some of our D&D work there, which has got some content. It needs to be updated to get caught up to where we are in the campaign, and that is forthcoming. So as usual, I am Joe Mahaffey, and I am not bored. I am board gaming.
And I'm James Engelhardt, wishing you that all your tiebreakers break your way. But I also want to add that if you want to join the discussion, you can go to our guild on Board Game Geek. You can Google Lay It on the Table Guild, BGG, and that should get you right there. And you can find our podcast there as well.
And I'll put that link in the show notes below. Thanks for the reminder.
Yeah.
See you next time.
See y'all.
I got a new game. It's gonna be great. It's the latest craze of 1988. Got a couple of pencils and a drawing pad. It's gonna be gnarly. It's gonna be rad. It's Pictionary. Put your piece on the board. Pictionary. Now what was that word? Pictionary. Oh, this sketch is absurd. Pictionary. I'm drawing